Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I had the absolute pleasure of discussing one of my huge passions, my love of Liverpool Football Club, with Liverpudlian Josh Williams. Josh is a football analyst, a journalist and author and a podcaster, and his very focused area of interest is a football club that I adore. Josh is from the city, he has an analytical mind, and he has combined that with his passion for his club. And on his podcast and Substack account, Distance Covered, he goes into the kind of clever detail that all dedicated fans love. He left his full-time job as a football journalist with the Liverpool Echo to bravely follow his passion. And if you want to read and listen to what he has to say, you have to subscribe. It's more than worth it. As well as being a clever football analyst, he's a super nice guy who seems to have this thing called life figured out. Let's hear from Josh. Josh Williams, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Doing okay, yeah. It's a nice day in Liverpool actually for once, which is nice. I've been out in it today, and it's been freezing for the past couple of months. So I think I'm just feeding off the weather at the moment. Yeah.
For me, you're a perfect guest on the Win Happy podcast because it's all about people in their lives choosing to do the things that they love, and maybe you've been forced to do this particular job that you do, but I suspect you haven't been forced to. What do you think?
No, I agree with you, yeah. I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in, to be fair. And I think it's just that sort of thing that you've just said there is just more important to different people, more important to some people than other people, basically. I think some people can just go through their lives in a different direction. But for me, I've always felt it's really important for me to be doing something that I actually want to do. And I've managed to establish that over the past couple of years. So, yeah, it's a pleasure to be on, mate, to be fair.
Yeah, it's a good thing to figure out at an early stage in your career because you can easily burn a lot of time punching in time for other people on their agenda. And if you can make it work for you, that really is what winning happy is all about in my book.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important, in my opinion at least, to be spending your time doing what you want to do. I think I actually did a presentation a couple of weeks ago for the official Liverpool FC charity, and I did get up at the time roughly how many hours the average person spends working, and it was something over the course of a lifetime. It was something like 90,000 hours or something like that. To be spending that much time doing something that you're not particularly interested in sounds like torture to me. So, I found a different way, thankfully.
It's a weird idea, actually, because, when you go to work and you might say, well, they pay you for your time. And in a way, you're the one that writes the biggest check with your time, because life is so precious and the most precious currency we have is our time. And to waste that on anything is a crime.
Yeah.
So, judging by your name, the listeners could well be mistaken to think, okay, he's a Welsh rugby supporter, definitely. But that's not the case. You're a journalist, a football analyst, an author, and a podcaster. And what I love about you is some of the very clear decision-making that you've made. I first came across you listening to the Analysing Anfield podcast. That used to come out but once a week in between all the other, the Blood Red podcasts and all that kind of thing. And it was the one show where it was more than a bit of a chit-chat about the game that any of us could have that we watched at the weekend or the game that's coming up. But in your case, it went beyond all of that because you were really analysing what was going on. And as a listener, you're like, okay, this is absolutely worth listening to. And of course, the Liverpool Echo, whatever cutbacks, I think pulled the plug on that particular piece of output that they had. And I think they pulled the plug on you as part of the process. And I was so delighted to see what you came back doing and all of that kind of stuff. And that was really brave. The crazy thing, if you observe any of the Reach publications, any of the Reach social media accounts, you can't click a link without seeing an advert.
Yeah.
And the weirdest thing was on those podcasts, and even on the Liverpool Echo one, the Blood Red Still, you know, you hear the little jingle for the ad break. There's no ads. They're so ad hungry, they're actually missing a piece of revenue. And yet, if I listen to something from the Daily and the New York Times or Rachel Maddow or any of these overseas ones, they're absolutely polluted with relevant local ads. So the Liverpool Echo are missing a bit of a trick. But anyway, it's not about them. This is about you. So what I try to do on all of these podcasts is get to know my guests a little bit. So a very simple question, Josh. Who the hell are you and where did you come from?
Is that in terms of me as a person or career-wise?
Yeah, you as a person, and for the listener to understand, how did this guy end up doing what he's doing now? Because the answer to that question is what came before, if you know what I mean. Where did you grow up and what did your mum and dad do?
Well, I'm from Liverpool, always have been. I've never lived anywhere else. So growing up in Liverpool, and you know, anyone who's been, it's a very footballing city. You know, we're obsessed with football here, and it's very normal to just kind of get in a taxi to go somewhere, and the taxi driver just says completely off the off, "Are you a red or are you a blue?" And immediately every person from Liverpool knows exactly what that question means. It means, are you a Liverpool fan or an Evertonian? So I'm a big Liverpool fan, always have been, and I initially studied business in college and in university, studied again, stayed in Liverpool. But once I graduated, I just kind of realised that I was reluctant to actually use the degree that I'd paid about 27 grand to acquire. And that was because I didn't really have any interest in the jobs. But on the side, I was chipping away at, like, I don't know, I was just running a Twitter account, just tweeting interesting things to do with football players and managers and teams. And I wrote the odd article here and there, but they were always free. But I was quite good at doing what I was doing though. Like, I've always been quite an analytical person. I've always been really logical. I can separate emotion from difficult situations. I can have difficult conversations with people, and I'm not biased in any way and things like that. So I'm quite good when it comes to, like, arguments maybe, or debates. Like, I'm quite good at sitting in the middle and not being attached to either side and things like that. Sorry, can you hear the dog?
I can, and you're quite okay, because I have one literally under my desk. And you might notice there, I have another one just behind me.
But I have a puppy, so that's the problem. Where was I?
It's a good problem to have. But you were saying you managed to have constructive discussions with people and you're not biased.
Yeah, so when it comes to football content, that was my approach. I think football content, generally speaking, is very old school, and there's lots of cliches. I think analysis is borderline lazy at times, whereas I've come at it from a perspective of, not particularly tribal towards any team, including Liverpool. I can talk about players who aren't playing well without getting emotional about it. I can be honest as to Liverpool's level, for example, rather than just... I think a lot of people who do Liverpool podcasts, Liverpool content, whatever you want to call it, a lot of people are basically cheerleaders in a way. It's just, it's non-stop positivity. And listen, that's not a bad thing, but I would prefer to come at it from the perspective of, like, this is what's really happened. This is what's good, this is what's bad, this is what's going to happen in the future, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I like to think that I've kind of took all of the qualities that I have as a person. I think I'm quite a good communicator and quite logical, honest. I think I've got a bit of personality, hopefully. And I've kind of combined all that to cover my favourite team, the team of my hometown. And it's just worked for me, really.
Yeah, and tell me, that choice about Liverpool Football Club, did that happen through your dad, or how did that begin?
Well, it's funny because My dad's actually an Evertonian, and my mum isn't particularly interested in football. So my earliest memory of football is basically playing it, in the streets and things like that, and on the schoolyard and things. And I used to be, do you know the game Football Manager? Well, it used to be called Championship Manager, and I have very, very, very early memories of playing that game, which is quite a strategic game. But I played that when I was like 5, when everyone else was playing like FIFA or Pro Evolution Soccer or whatever. I was playing a bit more of a strategic game, and I think that's impacted my perspective on the sport, actually. I used to play that game with my cousin because my mum and dad are separated. So I would go and see my dad every week, and my cousin lived in the same house as my dad. So I would just play Championship Manager with my cousin, who was a Liverpool fan. And I think that just kind of rubbed off on me a little bit, and I ended up just knowing no different, really. And I know for certain I was never at any point an Evertonian. It wasn't a case of changing colours at any point. But I think I've just been influenced by me cousin from a young age, to the extent that I'm now, a die-hard Liverpool fan, really.
It's amazing because we work in marketing and communications, and I always say that the ultimate brand is your football team. And there's a weird dynamic because when things go wrong, you might blame the manager, you might blame the players, you might blame the owners, but you've got this loyalty to this weird thing, the badge, the club, that idea that represents you. I even say jokingly, we change wives. You mentioned your mum and dad being separated. I separated. But you change wives, you change partners. You never change football teams.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because when you speak about, what you want to do for a career and things like that, and around the time that I got my degree, one question I did ask myself was, when it comes to interests, things like that, because I had a vague interest in music at the time, like DJing and things like that. But I ended up just thinking to myself, like, what is it that I love? What is it that I've always loved? And what is it that I will always love in the future? And the answer was football and Liverpool Football Club. So that for me was the easy answer in terms of chasing a career in that sector, in that industry, if you want, because it's the kind of thing that I'd never get tired of. I'm never going to want to really stop doing it. So there shouldn't really be any change of direction further down the line. So that was the kind of thing that I thought about when I was picking a career. It was about, like, what am I going to be into forever, basically. And the easy answer for me was football.
Yeah. I'm quite similar to you with my interests. I actually started off life as an accountant. Now, that wasn't for love of money or numbers or anything. It was to get involved in business. And as I had my qualifications, I really fancied coming to Liverpool to live, maybe even get a job around the club or something. The other thing that I absolutely loved was music. I had some record stores, and I'd wanted to get a job in the music industry, maybe move to London and all that kind of thing. But as I said to you, I separated, so that would have meant being away from my kids and stuff, so that wasn't going to happen. What was the first live Liverpool match you watched?
The first one I watched or the first one I attended?
Well, yeah, the first one you attended. Maybe there was someone tall sitting in front of you.
I think the first one that I attended was really bad. It was a friendly game, and it was against Lazio, and we actually lost 1-0. So as a child, you only really go for the match for one reason as a child, and that's to celebrate. And I didn't even get the chance to celebrate in the friendly because Liverpool didn't even score. So yeah, my earliest memory of going to the match is not the best. It was a very bad game.
Did you replace that one with a better memory, did you?
Well, my first Premier League game was against Tottenham Hotspur, so that was a bit more of a bigger match, and I think we won the game 3-0. I think there was a goal from about 30 yards as well, like an outside the box goal, which was good. So I tend to lean towards that as like my first memory, really. But truthfully, my first memory was Lazio, and it wasn't very good.
Yeah, my first one was my dad took me to a pre-season friendly in Lansdowne Road in Dublin. And it was the Kenny Dalglish, Jimmy Case vintage of player. And I remember there holding my dad's hand, watching the team bus roll in, and just in awe watching these gods, who who you absolutely adored. I had an interesting story. It's actually connected to the Lazio again. There was a pre-season friendly tournament in Dublin, because, as you know, Carlsberg was a brand that sponsored Liverpool for a while. I used to work for Guinness, and in Ireland, Carlsberg were one of the Guinness brands. And the Carlsberg brand manager knew I was a huge fan. So there was a pre-season tournament with the winner of the Irish League, the Italian League. They had Leeds in there as well, and Liverpool. So I was invited to the launch of the tournament. So there was a whole bunch of people brought over. I think at the time, the manager would have been Roy Evans. They brought Richie Partridge over. I think he was a young guy who never broke through as an Irish international. Was he gone out with Michael Owen's sister or something? But there was an older gentleman at the event that no one was talking to. So I ended up sitting next to him and chatting to him, "Where are you from?" His name was Peter Robinson, and he was the chairman of Liverpool. And we had a lovely conversation, and he was telling me about Shankly leaving and Bob Paisley and all that kind of thing. And he did say to me, this is before internet or anything, he gave me his number and said, "If you ever come over, just give me a call and I'll get you tickets for a match." So we based a whole holiday around that invitation. And sure enough, we rented a caravan in North Wales. I rang the number and yeah, absolutely, he remembered me. And he organised tickets for a game and a tour of the stadium and all that kind of thing. The match we went to was Liverpool-Milan pre-season friendly. Paul Ince had just started, but it was when Michael Owen had just come back from his Argentina goal. Do you remember the wonder goal at the World Cup when he was only 16 or whatever? Yeah. So, yeah, we have photographs with Michael Owen and my son and my daughter and all that kind of stuff. So we've been back a load of times since. So to turn this passion and this love into a career, what were your steps?
Well, I think the first thing was literally just creating a Twitter account and tweeting my thoughts. That was literally it. And the reason for that was because I didn't really have anyone around me, like my dad or friends or anybody who I could have, detailed tactical conversations with about strategy and things like that. I couldn't really do that. So I went online to find that community, I suppose, developed a bit of a brand for myself. I was kind of known, I've become known a little bit for being a tactics, numbers kind of guy, specifically in relation to Liverpool and things. I think I got to a point where I think I had about 10,000 followers and a job came up at Reach, the company that you mentioned earlier. And the job was a football scouting writer, a football writer who has the knowledge of a scout. That was the general idea. And because I had the evidence behind me of my Twitter account and a few free articles here and there and things like that, I took a chance on me at real entry level, to be fair. But that was my means of getting in the industry. That was my means of, previously I just worked in a supermarket. So that allowed me to leave the supermarket, start writing about football, become a little bit more established with a bit more pedigree and things like that. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, I had my own podcast with the Liverpool Echo. But because of that kind of clickbait nature attached to Reach, I never really felt like I fitted in, really, because I just don't believe in that. I think it's a load of nonsense. And if you look at my main source of income now, it's through a website called Substack. There's no adverts anywhere, and people pay for my content rather than me getting paid by adverts. That's the business model that I kind of believe in. But Reach nowadays, when Reach let me go, they let about 400 people go. And that's been a consistent thing for every 6 months. There seems to be redundancies with them. And that's because, in simple terms, really, the business model doesn't really work anymore. People are well aware that clickbait is, it's a trap. Basically, it's just nonsense. So people don't tend to click as much anymore and things like that. And advertisers don't pay as well and stuff. So I think we're moving towards a bit of an age where everybody will almost have their favourite creator, and you will pay that creator for his or her content or whatever. I think that's what we're moving towards. I think the classic football correspondent for a newspaper, I think they're becoming gradually extinct, personally. And I think we're moving towards this kind of age now where it's a bit more social media savvy, and it's a bit more, you pick your favourite personality and follow your club through them almost. And I'm hoping to be one of those people.
Do they set you free?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I'm quite, I don't want to say risk averse, but I'm not sure I would have jumped if they hadn't kicked me out the door. And obviously when they kicked me out the door, they give me a payoff, which allowed me to basically give me a bit of time before I decided what to do next. Give me a bit of a cushion to take a risk, maybe. And that was when I decided, rather than just applying for another job and working for a different paper, I thought, well, maybe I can just go on my own and just do my own thing, because I was always very opinionated with how content should look, and I always clashed with reach. I always wanted to do things my way. So I thought, if I set up my own thing, I can do that. And if people subscribe and pay me, great. If they don't pay me, I've got enough money to relax for a bit anyway. But thankfully it worked. So I suppose in a way, yeah, they did set me free, yeah.
Yeah. And in a way, Josh, I'm listening to the words that you're using. And while you say you're risk averse, you did take a risk when you were there by challenging the status quo about how content was presented and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the people who benefit are the listeners and the readers. And ultimately, that is down to their own publication. But they absolutely have got themselves sucked into a scenario whereby they think the only model is clickbait. We work quite closely with some of the Reach publications because they own publications in Ireland. And I know it's exactly the same. And one in particular, an online publication, I was chatting to the guy involved and he was in the horrors because suddenly Facebook changed their whole algorithms when it came to media outlets.
Yeah.
So the clicks he was getting from Facebook were like down to 20%. The whole business model was absolutely upside down. So making that move, and I thought it was very brave that you did. It's obvious that there was a community around you, like Mo Stewart and Neil Atkinson, the Anfield Rap and the Redmen. So there is a nice community of football commentators and analysts. You all seem to be good buddies and you enjoy a pint or two as well from the sounds of it. On the outside, it seems like it's a real happy community. Is it like that?
No, to be honest, I think I'm quite lucky because if I'd have been made redundant, 2 or 3 years ago, maybe I would have struggled to establish what I've got now. But I think because it happened when it did, I obviously had contacts with the Anfield Rap, as you just mentioned there, with Neil and things. I also do content with Redmen TV, and those are already two really big fan-led media companies, really, where people pay to be subscribed to those websites if you want. So by doing content with both of them, I was kind of getting put right in front of my ideal customer who is willing to pay for football content. I was being placed on a stage in front of them, really. So when it came to me launching my own platform, a lot of the people who saw me already on those platforms just naturally came over anyway and joined me. I've recently started doing a bit of TV work with LFC TV and Neil Atkinson. Yeah, well, Neil Atkinson, for example, is the person who gave them my phone number. He just decided one day when he was in there, can I give you the number? And he gave them mine. And then now, before I know it, I'm doing bits of work on TV and stuff. So the people who definitely really, really help. That's huge. And the community in Liverpool, as I said earlier, it's such a big football and city. Lots of big characters, big personalities. Everyone's brilliant. And the team are doing well as well, which is important. maybe everyone wouldn't be brilliant if the team was bad. Yeah, just kind of collaborating with everybody and establishing my own following for years now since I launched that Twitter account. It's just all kind of created this perfect storm, really, where I can now self-sustain with my own content and people are willing to pay me to follow Liverpool, basically. So it's kind of a dream, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, I remember your last broadcast on the Analysing Liverpool and thinking to myself, Jesus, where are you going to? You have to tell us what the next step is. Obviously, you didn't know it at the time. And I guess the Anfield Rap guys and all that community, that's helped you to, and you've obviously had the Twitter account, so you've had ample ways to actually promote your own thing. But going the pay-to-play model, in particular when you can consume so much online for absolutely nothing, was a brave move. Did you consider the A versus B? Well, I just put out a podcast and put it for free and try and make money somewhere else? Or did you look at the options there, did you?
Yeah, I did weigh it up. But I think obviously having experienced reach where you're bombarded by adverts and things like that, I really wanted to do my own thing. And I've always had a belief in, like, if you produce something that's good, people will follow you. People will subscribe to it and attach themselves or whatever to your brand and stuff like that. So there's a website out there, a platform called Substack, and it's specifically for writers, really. But they're also adding in, like, podcast platforms, and you can post videos on there and pictures and things like that. So with me being a writer first and a podcaster second, I suppose, I just thought if I go on Substack, I can do 2 articles a week and I can do 1 episode of my podcast and put that episode behind the paywall, basically. And I think, I just thought at the time it was different enough, and it was kind of the only place really that you could get me hosting my own stuff. I just thought if I charge a reasonable amount, let's just see how many people are willing to pay me, basically. It's worked out perfectly, and you get an ad-free experience. And I think a lot of people are not particularly accustomed to paying for content. I think that's probably the biggest hurdle. That's probably the biggest problem. People are very used to going and buying a coffee or a pint or whatever. Some people maybe on the way to work every single day will spend £5 on a coffee. But I ask for £5 for an entire month of content. Yes, people will have more of a problem with that than the actual coffee, which I think is quite funny. But more than enough people have been willing to support me. As I said, I've got to a point now where I can just do my own thing, and it's all working really well.
Yeah, you really have been set free. And for anyone listening, the podcast is called Distance Covered. And the Substack, that's the name of the account as well, isn't it? Distance Covered?
Well, Substack's the website that hosts it. So it's technically distancecovered.substack.com. And if you download the Substack app, you've got hundreds and hundreds and thousands of independent writers like me writing on their own Substacks about, like, just like a concept, really. Like for example, there'll be Substacks out there getting ran by chefs, and every single week on a Monday, every week, for example, you will get a new recipe in your inbox. That's kind of how it'll work. Or maybe you'll subscribe to a music Substack and you'll get a new record in your inbox every Monday or something. And with mine's just a Liverpool version of that. It's specifically tactics and data and stuff, specifically Liverpool FC. And you get 1 article on Monday, 1 article on Friday, and in between that, a podcast episode. And that just goes straight to your inbox every week. You don't have to do anything. And I've just found it to be a really useful platform for me to use to host what it is that I'm doing, basically.
Yeah, and to be fair to you, in the written word, there's really interesting content, which is fantastic to engage with. And on the podcast, you cover topics in a way that, a lot of the other outlets aren't doing. And you've interesting guests as well that really helps that conversation. I've been dying to ask you this question. What's going on with the music? Because definitely from listening, I haven't heard anyone else doing that. I remember the first time I heard your podcast, I'm thinking, this guy hasn't a clue. it's like 1.5 minutes of music at the beginning, and then the dulcet tones, Liverpool accent, Josh Williams comes on, and at the end then you're given a good whack of, I don't know, it's nearly a full track at the end as well. And it keeps on changing. What's going on with the music and where do you source it?
Yeah, well, again, going back to what I said earlier, I did have a bit of a past where I was very interested in DJing and things like that. So in terms of the music that I'm into, I'm not really into like singers or bands or anything like that. You know, it's not stuff that you'd see in the charts and things like that. I'm very into music that has a beat, music that you could mix, music that you could DJ. And I don't mean stuff that is like, you know, really hardcore and will you know, blast the skin off your face, and not that kind of stuff. It's much slower than that, but it's the kind of music that I would be very surprised if anybody knew what the name of the track was, for example. So with me kind of creating this concept, creating this brand, when it comes to the podcast, I think everything comes into it. It's not just the actual content where we're talking about football. It's also the cover image and the colours that you use and everything. And I even go as far as saying it's the music that you use. So, for example, I think recently Liverpool suffered from a bit of a bad game. So I picked a track that has a bit of a gloomy Halloween kind of mood to it. So the idea is basically setting the scene immediately for the podcast using the introduction track. So rather than using the same track every single week, I try to use a track that fits with the theme of the episode. It's not always possible. Sometimes I just pick a track that I like. I did that this week, for example. But sometimes it's a bit more relevant to exactly what's going on at the time. Like, for example, another example, I did an episode a couple of months ago on the transfer market. Obviously, buying and selling, you know, wheeling and dealing and all that sort of stuff. So the music that I picked was from the casino scene in Ocean's 11, the film. People might not even know that it's from that film, but they might have seen the film before. So when they press play on the episode, they just immediately start to picture slots and poker tables and stuff potentially. And I think that ties in with transfer business, for example. So I'm always thinking creatively like that to build this kind of picture in the, you know, in the subscriber's mind or whatever. And a lot of people appreciate it as well. It goes down quite well, and some people click onto the tunes that I'm using and things, and it works really. Another example I've just thought of. So there was a game a couple of months ago where Dominic Szoboszlai covered a lot of ground. He was running all the time and he was really, you know, industrious during the game. So I called that episode The Running Man. And the track that I picked for that episode was the theme tune of the Running Man film, featuring Arnold Schwarzenegger about 30 years ago or something. One or two people picked up on it. I'm assuming most people didn't. But that's just me trying to, you know, trying to connect everything.
That's really good and very clever. And I hadn't realised at all that you were picking them to suit the mood. I just thought, yeah, he's a music fan and he's going, do you know what now? I'm going to just put this music. And tell me, do you choose the music after the episode is recorded?
Most of the time, yes. But in certain situations, I've maybe thought ahead of the episode, you know, this week I'm going to talk about this. So what's relevant to that? And then I've picked a track maybe and that sort of thing. But most of the time it is after the event, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. I've been absolutely dying to hear that. And you're so right, because when you press play on the particular podcast, you're expecting something new as well as the content itself. But you are, okay, what's he going to play this week? So it is a little bit of a mix and match. So you are the DJ stroke football analyst, all of that. And of course, you're an author as well, and you have the book that you came out recently called The Data Game. My God Almighty, it is all in now on data, and you can't turn sideways without seeing your XG and possession stats and all of that. Is that absolutely essential? Are we going too far? I read Ian Graham's book as well, and he's connected with Liverpool, how to win the Premier League. And there's very few books that I get to the very end on. But I kept on reading and reading and reading. And the only thing I really got from it is, don't take shots from too far out. That was the only thing I really got from it. Where are we with data, do you think? How do you sum all that up? And have you been a huge consumer of it for a long time before you started talking about it?
No, not really. When I was in school, for example, I failed maths at GCSE level. I'm not particularly numbers inclined. I'm not particularly mathematical. I think what it is with me is I really understand football. So when it comes to numbers to do with football, I feel like I have a really good gauge on what matters and what doesn't. And I can kind of translate numbers to do with football and, get a read on what happened, basically. I can get a read on whether the team is good or bad or what a manager's doing or whatever. And I think that goes back again to Reach. When I started Reach, I wasn't really that interested in numbers, but at the time, because they were a clickbait company, they expected me to do a lot of articles. They wanted me to write four articles a day, but they had to be analytical. They had to be insightful. So sometimes they asked me to write about teams that I hadn't seen, and I had to produce something relatively quick on them. So my solution to that was, well, I can't use the footage because I haven't got enough time. So I'll use the numbers, and just gradually over time translated them more and more and got to a point where I could basically read how a team is performing using the underlying numbers behind them. But I like to think I have a bit of a common sense approach to applying the data to football. I think a lot of the time it is just nonsense. A lot of the time it's poorly used. It's exaggerated sometimes. The thing about numbers as well is you can kind of get them to suit any narrative, really. And that's obviously not the goal. The idea is understanding the numbers for what they are and going based on that, rather than going in with an immediate perspective and finding numbers to reinforce that, if you see what I mean. And again, that goes back to what I'm like as a person. As I said earlier, I'm not biased at all. I'm not I'm quite logical and, I'm not tribal, things like that. So those qualities allow me to look at the data for what it is and interpret it, basically. And ended up writing a book on it and things. But again, I didn't want to be too numbers heavy with the book. I wanted to ultimately tell a story first, and then the numbers come in second. Because I think a lot of people, when you start hearing statistics and things like that, a lot of people just tune out because it's too much to consume. I like to keep it really like a less is more type approach to it, and I think that keeps people engaged.
Okay, cool. Did you get to meet Jurgen?
Sadly not, no. That's one thing I've never benefited from. So even when I worked for Reach and the Echo and things like that, I've never actually experienced behind the scenes. I've never been to a press conference. I've never been to a match as part of the press. I've never interviewed anybody. So that's maybe something for the future potentially. But as of right now, maybe about 6 or 7 years into my career or whatever, that's something that I haven't done yet. I haven't really integrated the game. That's on my to-do list.
How did Mo get his press pass?
Well, Mo is doing bits for, I think is it Sirius XM? But I think, I'm not sure if he would mind me saying this, but as it stands, I think it's voluntary. Whereas I was obviously getting paid to produce Liverpool stuff, but they weren't allowing me to go to the match because only so many people are allowed in. And the Liverpool Echo already had 2 or 3 people in there anyway. So, but I think the idea for Mo was to monetize it eventually, obviously. But even Mo going to the press conferences and things like that, he's entering the room with a different perspective. A lot of people in there are journalists. They're kind of robotic a little bit. But sometimes it takes a fan like myself or like Mo to actually mix it up a little bit and ask something that's actually interesting rather than something that's just ticking a box, basically.
Yeah, and Arne is responding to that quite clearly at the press conference. You see, when Mo asks the question, he gives a little look and like, okay, you're the man with the clever questions. You're nearly listening out for it. The reason I ask about Jurgen, obviously we all loved him. I was at the final game, his final game this season against Wolves. I'd speculated on the market. I'd bought tickets at Christmas thinking we might be lifting the trophy and paid over the top money for it, but it was actually well worth it in the end. In terms of analysing the football, something that strikes me when we're watching is actually analysing the fans. And I thought Jurgen understood that better than anyone. He absolutely understood the dynamic between the fans and the effect it has on the team. Do you remember that West Brom match that, I don't know, did it finish 1-1 or 2-2? We got a goal in the last minute and we equalised. And he brought the team down to kind of like, say a big thank you to the cop, acknowledging their role in supporting the team. He got that. And I kind of worry, I don't know which season it was, where it looked like we were going good and we missed the Premiership by a point or whatever. And I always put it down to the fans being too tense and getting too stressed at some of the games. And the Man City fans, of course, they got beyond that stress. Yeah, don't worry about it. You know, the team look. But we were so desperate for it. And you can feel it when you're watching. When you're at a game, you can absolutely observe it. And I always thought Jurgen understood that and he communicated it. So is that an aspect to everything? And managing the fan themselves and the role they play. You even heard Amarin at the moment talking at Man U about how home matches are a disadvantage.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of things out there that can impact a football match and the flow of it. I think it's unlike any sport, really, in that sense. It's a low-scoring sport, but there's so many external factors that can have an impact on what's going on the pitch. And I think, obviously, supporters in the stadium, especially a stadium like Anfield, you know, a place that's known for its support, and you know, the seats are really close to the pitch, so you can have an impact on the players. The players can hear exactly what you're saying and things like that. I think you're right. I think Jurgen definitely played into that, and there was a countless number of Champions League knockout games, especially where going into the second leg, which was at Anfield, you know, Jurgen would basically say, you know, calling Anfield type thing. He would basically say, listen, we're going to need your help here. Knowing that, like, when Anfield does kick off, it's hard for any team, any opposing team, to actually play with calmness on the ball. You just kind of get swept up into a bit of a whirlwind, and before you know it, you've conceded 3. It's not so much the case for other clubs. It's not so much the case in other stadiums. But I think Liverpool, being such a passionate fan base, so obsessed with football, the makeup of the stadium, the history of the club, the manager in Jurgen Klopp, the playing style, everything I think was aligned for Liverpool to just be really aggressive and basically horrible to play against. And I think Liverpool's best days under Jurgen, that's what Liverpool were. Liverpool were just really hard to play against, and it was a real battle. And you come off the pitch at the end of the day, shattered and shook and scared, because you've just been through the tumble dryer, basically. So I do think fans have a huge impact, whether we like it or not.
It'd be an interesting exercise, wouldn't it, to analyse the clubs in the Premiership and to see how many points a season are the fans worth. Like if you look at Brentford or Notts Forest or like some of those shitty games we've had recently, the dynamic of the fan is definitely worth so many points. And to Liverpool, of course. A few little questions for you. And of course the one that Arne won't answer at all. Contracts. It's so difficult because, in my opinion, when it comes to Mo Salah and Van Dijk, the club is obviously being asked to commit huge money for a number of years. And if a player is depreciating and you need to start thinking about replacing them, you can't pay the huge money and pay for a replacement at the same time. So you need to be so sure about the longevity of that particular player, or not, as the case may be. What are your feelings?
Well, I think with contracts, the big thing to remember is when you give out a player's contract, you're paying him for what he will do, not what he has done in the past. I think a lot of supporters get confused with that. They look at the product over the past 5 or 10 years or whatever and see that it's good, and they want to give him a contract, when in reality, you need to forecast what's coming, forecast what's over the hill. And that's why when it comes to players who are 30 years or older, usually, like say for example, Trent Alexander-Arnold, when Trent gets to the point where he's 2 years away from his contract expiring, you offer him a deal immediately because you want to keep him, because he's still in his peak. Whereas if you're a little bit older, if you're over the age of 30, in my opinion, it makes a lot of sense to wait as long as possible before giving those players contracts, because that way you're getting as close to the deadline as possible and seeing what that player looks like at that point before you then extend his contract. So when it comes to Salah and Van Dijk, I haven't really got too much of a problem with Liverpool waiting up until Christmas, 6 months before the expiration date, to actually do business. I think we're slightly past that point now, and I think I would like deals to be made. I would keep all three personally. And again, I'm not emotional. I'm not biased. That's my general analysis of the situation. I think we should keep all three if possible. When we let Wijnaldum go, I agreed with it. When we let Firmino go, I agreed with it. When we let Naby Keita go, Oxlade-Chamberlain, I agreed with all of them. But this time, with Trent, Salah and Van Dijk, I would keep all three, because all three look like, for the next 2 years, to be at roughly the same level that they're at now. And the level that they're at now is unbelievably high. So the only problem can be financial, really. So it's just about meeting in the middle type thing. With Trent, obviously he's linked to Real Madrid. If Real Madrid have turned his head, Real Madrid have turned his head. There's not much you can do about that. But when it comes to finances, I like to think that a deal will eventually get done with all three players, hopefully. But you never know.
Yeah, so that's your prediction, is it?
I think Salah and Van Dijk, definitely yes. Trent just depends entirely on Real Madrid. I can't call that one.
Yeah, okay. A few quick questions just to wrap things up. Your best LFC moment?
I think winning the Champions League under Jurgen was obviously a big deal. That was amazing. I think the team finally got what they deserved, and Jurgen finally got what he deserved. And, it was a relatively comfortable game. He won 2-0, kept a clean sheet and things. And that was really nice. There was a game a few years ago against Borussia Dortmund, an early Jurgen Klopp game. I think we ended up winning 4-3. Crazy. At Anfield. I was at that game, so that was insane.
I was at that game.
Yeah. I was at that game. That was insane.
Jurgen quotes that as being the best game he's ever witnessed and experienced. Yeah,
well, I wouldn't challenge that at all. I think that was insane. Yeah. That was the thing about Liverpool back then as well, is Liverpool weren't really that good. A lot of development still had to happen, and a lot of players still had to be signed and stuff. So for Liverpool to go and do that at the time, it was just amazing, because we weren't used to the glory days at that point.
Yeah. Do you remember that particular occasion? I'm not sure if you do. Second half, James Milner's corners, one was worse than the next, and finally, that's how we scored the winning goal, I think. Your worst Liverpool moment?
I think the days under Roy Hodgson were bad. Liverpool were clueless, buying bad players, to be honest, drifting around mid-table, and just generally didn't really have a clue of how to succeed. And on top of that, our biggest rivals, Man United, were obviously pretty much winning all the time. Well, it's funny because roles are reversed now. Obviously, different situation now. But back when Liverpool struggled, hopefully we never return to those days. So yeah. that was definitely a bad period.
Yeah, it was awful. Your favourite player?
Liverpool player?
Yeah. Of course.
It's a good question. I think the best that I've seen is Luis Suarez. I think he was just on a different planet. Absolutely unbelievable as an individual player. But obviously Steven Gerrard is the obvious for any Scouser, to be fair, but just a club legend, could do it all, unbelievable player. And I've had a fair few little favourites here and there between them, you know, players who aren't as popular. But Suarez and Gerrard are the two that come to mind as the real stars, superstars.
Yeah, and funny, one of my favourites is Sami Hyypiä.
Yeah.
Because for me, that was the beginning of the change. That was when Julia, you know, brought him in. We then started to come back and we were a serious team again. What's happiness to you?
What's happiness to you? It's a good question, that. I think for me, happiness is doing what you want. Freedom. I think being able to just wake up and do whatever you want for me is happiness. That's why I'm so set on this when it comes to a career, and that's why I try to travel a lot. Since I've launched this career, I think I've had a lot more spare time since finishing the book and getting the book out there and stuff like that. I've had a lot of spare time, and I think a lot of people in that situation are just naturally inclined to just think, well, I'll just work a bit more then. But I've deliberately tried not to do that. I've deliberately tried to embrace the space almost, so that I've got room for like a random coffee with an old friend, or I can walk the dog, or I can play a game of tennis, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think for me, there was a day that I had about 4 years ago or something. I went to Thailand with my family, and there was a day when we just woke up. We didn't really have a plan for the day. So me, my sister, girlfriend, and my sister's girlfriend just rented 2 mopeds, and we just drove. Just drove. We didn't have a destination, just went. And we just spent a bit of time on a beach. Then at the end of the day, when the sun was setting, we found a resort that nobody was on, and we just literally just got in the pool, despite not staying at the resort, and watched the sunset and drove home. It's probably the most free I've ever felt, and there was no plan to the day at all. It was just exploring. I think I'm really big on like exploring and things like that, but I always look back and think like that might be my favourite day ever.
Yeah. Wow.
And again, it goes back to that freedom thing.
That's a question I used to ask people on the podcast, and too many people were saying to me that, you know, the day I got married or the day my child was born, I'm like, come on, go a bit deeper than that.
Yeah.
And it's funny, those perfect days, often they're not planned. That was a great perfect day.
Yeah, it was amazing. I always think back to it. It was just a very unplanned, random day that just went. It was just a really happy day.
Yeah. And what does winning look like for you? You know, so you're on a new direction. You clearly love what you're doing, but you know that feeling when you hit the ball in the back of the net and that moment of elation. What are those hitting the back of the net moments for you now and going forward?
Well, I'm kind of I'm a process man, I like to say. So I like the journey rather than the outcome. So for me, winning is improving. I like the idea of growth. If you're just growing every day, you're getting better every day in every area of life, really, when it comes to your health, your relationships, everything. If things are getting better, and sometimes they have to get worse to get better as well, but if things generally are on the upward curve, I think you win. I think you're doing well, and I like to adopt that kind of growth mindset. Yeah, I think I'm probably benefiting from it at the moment, but that for me is winning.
Okay, I love that. I've one last whopper of a question for you.
Okay.
So you get a call from the LFC data analytics team. We've heard your podcast. We want you to join us. We need your expertise, your thought process, except you have to ditch all of this distance covered stuff and your Substack work and all that kind of thing. Because once you're in with Liverpool, that's it, you're all in. What do you say to them? You
know what? That's a really difficult one, because it feels like the obvious answer should be an immediate yes, but you've just asked me what is happiness.
Yeah.
And my definition of happiness was freedom. So if I worked for the man again, if I worked for the company again, I'd be doing fixed hours. I'd be working a lot more. I'd be asking for holidays. Obviously, it'd be interesting to work for a club and to see what goes on behind the scenes, but the actual lifestyle that comes with it, the lifestyle that, in my opinion, makes me happy, would probably have to go. So I actually think I'd turn it down. But I don't know, remains to be seen. I doubt it'll ever happen. But if I did get asked, it would not be a straightforward yes by any means. I'd have to really think about that.
Yeah, might depend on the money.
Well, yeah, that comes into it as well. But it's funny that everything I've just said, money didn't even cross my mind. You know, saying everything about happiness and things like that. For me, that doesn't really. Obviously, it comes into it to a certain extent, but it is more about just exploring and freedom and that sort of thing for me, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah. Josh Williams, you're an absolute gentleman. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast and sharing your story and your passion. And to be honest with you, the thing that I was really surprised about is your very cool and wise attitude towards life. It sounds like you've cracked the code a little bit.
I mean, I'll take that every day of the week. I like to think I've got a good perspective on things. So thanks for that, mate. I appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, you're welcome. Talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.